Scuttlebutt 7. Okay, so I'm re-recording this one because the version which I had uploaded has for some reason turned into an absolute beeping mess. But I will tell you this before we start, that my sister is travelling. Why does this have an effect on you? Why does it have an effect on me? Well, that means that instead of me able to turn my phone on silent during a recording session, as she's travelling overnight, I have to have it on noisemaker, because the dogs, who are all the way over in their normal sleeping positions, if they decide to start whimpering because they want to go out, my mum will call me and basically tell me. Because it's better to deal with them whimpering than when they're fully blown woofing, woof, woof, woofing. So, I was saying that at the beginning. If there are cuts in this or weird places where I seem to have disappeared or something, I probably just cut out phone going, had to go to dog, I got dog. Or alternatively, I have absolutely mangled up the names of people so badly that I need to redo it again. Those are the two options. Heads up at the beginning. So this was an interesting one to me. Scuttlebutt 6 actually had this question, and it was some of the first times that people started putting Scuttlebutt questions for Scuttlebutt in the actual comments, and I quite like that. I think there are still quite a lot of people quite confused, because sometimes I just write Scuttlebutt underneath a comment, and yeah. People go, why are you writing this? I will say, though, that I've learnt my lesson, because there was a very nice gentleman who, a few years ago, invited me to go look at a cruiser in the US. And I said, yes, if I ever do an America trip, I'll come there. And I was hunting for that comment to stick it on my video list for the Historiathon. And I can't find it to save my life. I know, but for some reason the word cruiser is quite common, and I cannot remember the specific name of the cruiser. So if you are the very nice gentleman who invited me to go see your cruiser, and you're having to watch this video, please do comment below and tell me, because it's one of the things I want to add in, as if I get enough money for a US trip, for the extended US trip, that is one of the ships I would like to go visit, because you very kindly were the first person to ever comment on a video and invite me to come see your cruiser. And you know, it's going to sound strange, but I expect these things for my friend Drac. I expect to see them for him, because he is so amazing and so good at YouTube, and he's so good at getting the history out there, that I expect to see those offers for him. I find it very weird whenever I get given such an offer, but I always want to try and respond in a positive way, because it's so kind. And it's not the kind of atmosphere... I don't want people to get the wrong idea about academic history. It's not the kind of world we normally work in, which is incredibly competitive. And whilst there are some absolute gems in it, there are also some absolute individuals, I'd say. Anyway, so with that being said, and hopefully that gentleman is watching this video and will be able to comment below again, so I'll be able to add it in, because that would have been a really fun thing. Would be a really fun thing for me to do on this, if the Historiathon gets that far. And as you'll know, I've put it in the stretch goals, which I honestly don't believe is going to happen. I don't know if I'll get even enough money from the 36 hours for the non-stretch goals, but you know, people keep telling me, oh yeah, make you watch The Princess Bride, it'll happen. I'm going, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. I love people, I love their generosity, I know how kind and how caring the community is on this channel, etc. But yeah, that's a bit of a stretch. Especially when they kept going, no, make it higher, make it get higher. You know, they'll do that for that. Okay, fine, but I don't think it'll happen. I don't. But if I'm proved wrong... Anyway, question 6 from Juicy Sushi. Question for Scuttlebutt 6, and actually ended up with Scuttlebutt 7, because unfortunately, Juicy Sushi, you literally wrote that comment the day I recorded Scuttlebutt 6. It was a case of, yeah, that's not happening. We frequently have hypotheticals where the Royal Navy are able to maintain a carrier force at Singapore in late 1941. It really, honestly, if Courageous or Glorious hadn't been lost, there'd have been a carrier there with Force E. It's not going to be a massive carrier force, even under the historic scenario. But again, if you don't have Italy in it, as said, that well, look at where the Royal Navy's deploying their carriers. It's kind of like where the Royal Navy has their fast tankers. Where does Britain lose its fast tanker fleet? Where does it lose its fast merchant fleet? Oh, on convoys in the Mediterranean, usually trying to reinforce Malta is where they get damaged and where they get... Oh, yeah. So, if you don't have Italy in the war, it's amazing how many of the cumulative losses Britain has issues with don't get lost, and the cumulative issues with commitment of their forces. But also, conversely, of course, that means a lot of the experience they get, which really does polish up their pre-war ideas on fleet air defense and how to coordinate fighters and allows them to really demonstrate and grow that, wouldn't happen. So, that's a minus. But there again, the not having the losses would probably be a bit more of a positive, and you never know, they might refine quite a chunk of that thanks to stuff in the Bay of Biscay and North Sea and, well, exercises. You never know. They can be useful. But anyway, yeah, I feel like the implications of this are under-discussed. If the IJN knows that the Royal Navy have a significant fleet with air cover, can they proceed with their war plan? Either the key part of the tie needs to be weakened so that simultaneous moves southeast can have adequate support, or they must be delayed. And if delayed, with the initiative lost, can the IJN afford to attempt them? If not, does this mean Japan is stuck with you seeking diplomatic solution instead of, or do they gamble on a weaker strike on Pearl Harbor? Now, there's actually something really interesting to be discussed, is because on Thursday this week, I am doing a video on what happens if the Kido Butai is discovered. And the key problem with the Kido Butai being discovered is they literally do pick a route, which they can do just about to Pearl Harbor, and trust me, it's a close run thing, to avoid being detected. Try to plot out a similar route to attack Singapore without being detected coming. Try. You can't. You cannot. You pretty much, to try and have an undetected route to Singapore, you have to go almost out into the middle of the Pacific, down, carefully trying to skim US bases, around the south of Australia and Tasmania and New Zealand, basically go wide round them down into the down to the southern oceans, the deep southern oceans, and then come up and attack Singapore from the Indian Ocean direction. Japan ships will run out of fuel doing that. They do not have the fleet tanker support, they do not have anything to get that done. Okay? And also then we have to consider what kind of carrier force does the Royal Navy have there. As I said, the basic roll of dice is usually 1 to 2 carriers. And 1 to 2 fast capital ships. That's what minor changes of history, just 1 or 2 things rolling in a different direction it creates. Okay. That's probably not enough to justify Japan changing their war plan. Because an attack is either worth you sending everything, or it's worth you sending nothing. In the Japan scenario at this point. Throwing everything into the attack at them on Pearl Harbor can net them a great result. Dividing stuff off to go attacking elsewhere, and actually probably revealing your attack, is not going to help you. Also, there's the fact that if they go and attack Pearl Harbor, great. What can the British carrier fleet do on its own at this point? What can it attack? So all that being said, realistically, I don't think it does change their plan. I think that what the British can offer is something in the counter-attack. And I think what probably you would see is a different thrust southwards. I would say if there's a carrier force, carriers with the fast cavalry ships, let's be honest, Force Z plays out very differently. You have any fighters. Those are unescorted bombers at their maximum range. They are able to mass up and engage the capital ships as, you know, from all points, do it almost, it's almost like a peacetime exercise, realistically. With fighters there, with carriers, with radar active, with coordination going on, and if you've got the fighters already up and you're already coordinating them, and you've got radar going because of their duties, then frankly there's going to be enough noise that's going to attract the RAF fighters as well, probably coming in. Well, they're all Australian Air Force fighters. It's a very different 4C scenario. Frankly, the Japanese probably lose a whole lot of torpedo bombers, and realistically, that force then rolls up on the amphibious forces and starts taking out their supply ships. I don't think they do that. I don't think in a scenario where there's a carriers and battleships, please note the combined force, that the Japanese are prepared to throw so much unescorted force behind it. I think they would have more down there. I think they'd have to deploy more ships. So that might be delayed until the Kido Butai can be rearmed and be redeployed. It might well be the Kido Butai comes back in and at least a couple of those carriers are turned around as quickly as they can be to be sent out again. The idea was they came back and waited for the American charge after them. When that didn't happen, you know, then they did other things. But I think that's what they do. The reason I say this is because the point of view of a lot of the Japanese commanders, it seems to be in this scenario, is not that they ever think they really stand much of a chance of winning a war versus America. It's that they prefer to have a war and have a chance of winning than be destroyed without even fighting. Because that's what they see the Americans are doing to them. And as such a scenario, when you're already in such a fatalistic mindset, well, the decisions you make are not going to be the most logical ones anyway under that circumstance. And frankly, starting a war of aggression is never something done by a logical actor. Wars are not started by logic, they're started by emotion. If you go through any single war in history, they are greed, they are anger, they are anguish. They're not started by logic. No one goes, 2 + 2, therefore it equals war. There's no sum like that. It's greed, it's anger, it's anguish, it's negative emotions. No one goes, I'm happy, so let's have a war today. Well, I suppose if you are truly, truly strange, possibly. But even then, are you really happy if you want to start a war? So yes, it's Scuttlebutt 7, which is... well, it's going out on the 20th of November. And what we've got coming up, Kido Butai and World War I in English Channel. And currently there is a vote live for December and January's patron videos. So please go and vote if you haven't. And anything else I've got to announce, well, I'll leave that for when we get to the Shameless book plug. But I will say this. This is Scuttlebutt. This is comment response video. So there's lots of different videos discussed. It's also sometimes I consider it better for me to respond in person rather than writing things out, because sarcasm doesn't translate well on a written comment. It can sound rude, when really I'm not being sarcastic at you, I'm being sarcastic at the government at the time being so stupid. I can deliver that far better with vocal inflections than I can through the medium of writing and emojis. Now, Jack Howe, calling Hood and G3's Battlecruisers really makes fast battleships and Battlecruisers the same things. No, it doesn't. And this is something I keep explaining. But Jack, you seem to have managed to miss this in every single video you've commented on, so I do not know, because I'm surprised there aren't people now who can recite what I explain about Battlecruisers, battleships. Well, from Battlecruiser 2 words to Battlecruiser 1 words to to fast battleships to battleships by memory and off by heart. No, if the G3s were US designed, they would not have been fast battleships. And if the ours were all Navy designs, they would not have been Battlecruisers. They were not different terminology for the same thing. They weren't. Do you know how I know this? Because it's not about the thickness of the armour. It's about how much the armour covers of the ship. It's not about the power of the engines or the speed. It's about how densely bulkheaded that ship is. How much subdivision goes on. So, in a battle cruiser, 2 words, you will have cruiser level subdivision and probably cruiser level armour coverage. That armour could still be 13, 16, 18, 24 inches thick. Doesn't matter. It's how much of the hull it covers. Doesn't matter. You can go, well, this has the same thickness armour as this battleship, so therefore they are both No, they're not. And the example I tend to give is this. If you armoured a human like they are a battleship, then you have the equivalent of a jousting armour from the age of knights and chivalry, the armour which they had to be craned onto a horse for. It's a bit of a myth that they were used that for war. They didn't. It was entirely for, the fun and games of jousting. But that's the level of armouring we're talking about for a full-on battleship. And as you're going down, you're getting less and less. You might get the same quality armour, but it's not going to cover the same space. But in return, you're getting far more manoeuvrability. That's what you are exchanging. You're exchanging physical protection for manoeuvrability, which can give you protection in terms of your ability to avoid the blows as you go down with less armour. So this is the point. These words actually have meaning behind them. They have values. They have judgments behind them. When I call something a battle cruiser, there is a specific meaning I'm looking at. I'm looking for a certain level of density in terms of subdivision. I'm looking for a certain level of armour coverage. And it's going to be exchanging speed for that, if it's a battlecruiser 1 word, compared to what it would be if it was a battlecruiser 2 words. Now, in the case of Hood, the Admiral class start out as a battlecruiser 2 words. They are modified and upgraded, but they do not become a fast battleship, because they still have a pretty much a heavy amount of subdivision, which is still in the cruiser configuration. Okay, cruiser. They have more subdivision added in critical areas where they can, but they can't add it in university across the hull, which is one of the reasons why the subsequent admirals are cancelled, because they cannot turn them into fast battleships, or rather, battlecruiser 1 words that they are happy with. And I can show you then that because the G3s are battlecruisers they are happy with. 1 words. Now, the reason I am sure that G3s are battlecruisers is because A, that's what the British define as, but also B, the British are, and the Japanese have picked up on the British technology and this terminology, are the one service, the one armed force at the time, which has attempted to build a fast battleship design already. Now, it fell flat. The Queen does have very good ships, but they aren't the fast battleship the Royal Navy was looking for. They aren't. Because the trouble is they can keep up with the old cruiser line, but they can't keep up the cruiser line which exists by the time they're being designed. And that's a problem. They can keep up the cruiser line when that's being specified, but by the time they're being designed, it had been moved up to 28 knots. And that's the definition of a fast battleship as well. It has to be able to keep up with the cruiser line. And the cruiser line speed, is pretty much every navy in the world, there's 1 or 2 which try and put 27.5 knots, there's one which puts 29 knots, is 28 knots. Okay? 28 knots. So for a battleship to be a fast battleship, it has to be able to do 28 knots. That's why Yamato class are not fast battleships. They can only do 27 knots. And they're with the Japanese Navy, which actually has a slightly faster cruiser line, so they really should be able to do at least 28 knots if they want to be fast battleships. You have the cutoffs. So I know you might think that I'm being arbitrary with my designations and I'm being rude to people, but I'm not. I know you might think that, I'm confusing things, but I'm not. Hood is a battlecruiser. The G3s are battlecruisers. Hood has evolved from a battlecruiser 2-word to a battlecruiser 1-word, and the Royal Navy's still not really happy with it because it hasn't got enough subdivision. And if you wanted the G3s to be fast battleships, well, you'd be dropping some speed off them and increasing subdivision and armor coverage in exchange for dropping that speed off them, because you're adding in more density and weight to the hull. That's the reality of it. It just is. And to be fair, I would argue that the last real dreadnought battleships designed are the N3s. They are the battleships of the G3 generation. Because I think from then on, when you look at the battleships that come out, they're all trying to aim closer to being a fast battleship. And there is a reason I call it the spectrum, the capital ship spectrum. From the battlecruiser to the battlecruiser 1-word, to the fast battleship, to the full-on battleship, the dreadnought battleship. There's a reason I call it a spectrum, because often ships do not fit neatly on that line. And you can be right, the G3 is slightly over the line of the battlecruiser and heading slightly towards the fast battleship. But it's not past the halfway point between those two by a long margin. Not in British design parlance. And you have to look at sometimes what they're calling it at the time. Now, the interesting one usually brought up by people is Vanguard, a fully armoured battlecruiser. Now, what's the difference between it and a fast battleship? Well, that is more of a distinction without much difference. But basically, when you start looking through Vanguard and you start really working out the reason the British give it that definition is not because they're actually lying to themselves or cheating in any way, shape or form. They have fast battleships. Remember what the King George V's are? They're 28-knot ships. Remember what the Lions are planning to be? They're 28-knot ships. So why wouldn't they call, if they're building fast battleships, why don't they call Vanguard a fast battleship? Well, here's the reason. It's a very simple one. She has battlecruiser level subdivision for large chunks of a hull, but she has fast battleship level armor coverage hung on that hull, which is one of the reasons which caused difficulty with her later on in life, but leave it on one side. So the thing is, she has the armor coverage you'd expect from a fast battleship, but she doesn't have the subdivision. So she's a fully armored battlecruiser. In other words, she's a distinction without a difference, realistically, because most people don't care about the subdivision other than the navies when putting on, and it only matters with damage control and resilience of the ship to sinking. But that's that's the point for the definition. Anyway, I hope that answered your question, Jack, because, well, yeah, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting thing to get into. And you do have a bit of a further question going on there, because, Navy should, just getting into, different terminology. Lexington class was the last proper battlecruiser 2-word design. Yeah, you're pretty much right. You're right, for the lower end of the spectrum. As I often say, the Battlecruisers, the last of the Invincibles style battlecruiser designs, are the Lexingtons. But basically, I would say the differential you're looking at with a fast battleship versus a battlecruiser is often more to do with armor coverage, density of their subdivision, and I would also add in usually speed. Because a battlecruiser is usually aiming for mid-30s, fast battleships are usually aiming for 28 to low 30s. The Iowas are kind of special as well, because you also have to remember they're also next generation beyond what we're talking about in terms of power you can get out of their engines and power they can get out of the boilers. So if you put The question is, if you put boilers which are that efficient in the G3s to take up the same amount of space, how much how much power would they get out from their systems, and what would that have an effect on in terms of their speed through the water? And of course, that also gets into hull shaping, all the hydrodynamics, etc., all the designs of that. So, yeah, it's never an easy thing to discuss the differential between those two, because they are in many ways two sides of the same coin. Fast battleships and battlecruisers, but basically the rule of thumb is look at their subdivision and also look at what the fleet's looking at them for. If they're looking more at something as a warfighting tool to engage the enemy fleet, they're probably going to go for a fast battleship. If they're looking at something which is more for peacetime global presence mission and wartime counter-surface radar reconnaissance and actually potentially surface raiding roles itself, although of course the Royal Navy is always building ships to be counter-surface raiders, never to be building surface raiders. The fact that the same skills that make you good at countering surface raiders over the distance the British Empire covers is also the same attributes which make you a good surface raider, we'll leave to one side. Yeah, it's fun, but yeah, that look at their roles and subdivision and the coverage of the armor, not the thickness, not the plates given, but the actual coverage, how much of the hull it covers, how much the densest armor covers, where it covers of the hull. These are all factors, and you look at it, and it's sometimes very fun to get into the discussions, because as I said, there's mine and Drax debate over Congos, because there are two of them which I think managed to, thanks to the subdivision built into them and some of the armor coverage added to them during their upgrades, which possibly make fast battleships, but there are two which I would argue definitely don't. And he argues none of them cross the line to being from battlecruisers to fast battleships. And I'm going, well, no, there are two which are done in that yard, which they have extra subdivisions stuck in them, so it's as in the Congo class was already, as they were historically built, were already very close to that line between the two. They were some of the most battlecruiser designs of their generation. The other example being HMS Tiger. There's a reason she's as tough as she is. She's actually the closest you've got to pretty much the British. If the British had been going to build what would have been a true fast battleship, the Queen Elizabeth had the potential, but for that they needed the small tube boilers and they needed to be slightly longer. They really did. But Tiger, if you increase the density of her subdivision a bit, increase the armor coverage, she very quickly becomes a fast battleship. Very quickly. She's a glorious design, is Tiger. But there's also a reason she's as expensive as she is and she's as heavy as she is. Scuttlebutt 7 from Chandler Chandle. This was an interesting one. Another one suggested for the future Scuttlebutt. Strengths and weaknesses of single centres of excellence versus multiple centres of excellence. Also, really large coastlines with relatively easy access for most parties. Maritime defence or peninsulations like Spain, Italy, or Korea. The last part of the secondary question, honestly, I think I'm going to need to elaborate slightly more on that, Chandlord, but I can do the first one quite well. You see, if you have a single centre of excellence, you can gather everyone together, and you can focus your funding in and give the funding centre, and you can provide the best of all facilities for them to do. However, the trouble with single centre of excellence, it's very easy for it to become dominated by a single personality. And that person to become the god of the complex. That's your problem. Because once you have someone who's an unquestioned god, you don't really have a centre of excellence, you have a centre of ego. Model centres of excellence allow you to balance that out, because whilst there are multiple sites where such people could potentially become in charge, they will all tend to, as a group, collectively balance each other out. But basically, each site will probably be dominated by one or two personalities. And if you want a good example, have a look at any think tank. There is a reason why the longer a think tank runs, usually the more intriguing its takes get, because the more likely it is to be taken over by a personality who will inevitably become a parody of themselves as they're constantly told how amazing and smart they are. And everyone keeps going, oh, that paper you wrote. I've worked with a few think tanks in the past, and the ones I've really enjoyed working with are the ones which have people from a broad range of backgrounds and no clear leadership. It's rather helpful when there's no clear leadership. There might be people who imagine themselves in charge, but without, especially if it's a voluntary think tank, an organisation, then they don't really have the formal control over people who are employed. They just don't. But it's fun. Shameless book plug. So this is going to be a bit of a different Shameless book plug than normal, because I have literally been having comments recently on the videos which I want to respond to, where I'm going, please go read my book. And there was one comment, they will remain nameless, I haven't put them in this. They literally commented on a video talking about, and they were asking about destroyers, and they said they were reading my book, and I went, fairly sure I know where you are. And then they commented like 2 hours later, and I hadn't got back to them by that point, because they had commented, and what was I doing? I was driving somewhere that day. I think I was driving down to the Land's End. So literally they commented when I was just getting ready to leave and went, oh. By the time I got down to Land's End, through the traffic, via the, of course, obligatory bakery, which has a very good pasty called Phelps, to pick up my lunch that I was going to take with me, and got to where I was meeting some people at Land's End, they'd commented again, don't worry, read the next chapter. I do wonder if the whole point of the Historiathon, which is, for me, is to publish books, and to get some books out, if those books are going to result in similar things. Who knows? Hopefully. And hopefully they'll be good enough, they'll fund more books. And more books. And there'll be an ever-increasing supply of books. Of good history books, hopefully, that people enjoy. People will find interesting. Self-publishing is an interesting route to go. I'm looking forward to it. I'm not looking forward to it from the point of view of, if there are any spelling mistakes, it will be entirely on me. And any issues, there will be no editors, anyone else involved other than me. As far as anyone else is concerned, anyone who does editing is basically going to be, reporting to me while doing it. So, yeah, the buck will completely stop with me, rather than just officially stopping with me, as far as I'm concerned, because my name's on it, so it does stop with me. But there will be there's no one else to stand there and go, well, it was sort of also my thing as well when you're self-publishing. But it should be fun. Now, Paul, coal for you is turning into a major issue, and you do some comments on. You and I sometimes have slight differences of terminology, but I listen to you. You've done a lot of research into it. And I do understand where you're coming from this, because Welsh coal is the Welsh steam coal is the best coal you can get for ships. But it's actually not the best coal which comes out of Wales in terms of cost. And even of the Welsh steam coal, the stuff that goes to ships, it's not the stuff which goes to the trains. If you want to know where the most expensive Welsh coal goes, it goes to the railways for their express trains, because they're prepared to pay the money for it, and they will pay the money for it, because if you want to see a tender loving care, you look at how the railways have to treat their express steam trains and their boilers. So it's the best coal you can get for ships, yes, but it's not the best coal you can get. It's not the most expensive. It's not the most easy to use and whilst it is of the densest category of coal in terms of BTUs, you are correct, and is much denser than most other navies are able to get hold of, it is not the densest end of that usually. That, to keep it to get it delivered at that grade especially, is a very time sensitive matter, and as much as effort as the Royal Navy puts into doing that, no. So yes, it is the best you can get for ship fuel. It's the best quality ship fuel. And it's much the same today if you look at modern NATO navies. They get the best quality fuel you get. It's that ship fuel. It's just ship fuel is ship fuel. As refined as it sometimes is, it isn't going to come from the more expensive end of the spectrum. No one is going to turn around and go, you know what? What I want to put in here is the same fuel I'm putting in a fighter jet. And even that, no. It's not the same fuel I want to put in a... No. I'm going to go for the same fuel I put in a Formula 1 racing car. Or something at Le Mans. No. You're not getting that for your ship. When you are literally... your fuel is measured in tons... and the person at the other end picking up the check is an accountant in a treasury or other financial organisation attached to government, trust me, if you go to them and go, I would like to use this, it's not going to work. No matter how good it is, even for the Royal Navy in this period. And also, here's the other thing. You're talking about the fine Welsh coal. The Royal Navy gets that, they do, and yes, they supply the ground fleet from that pretty much exclusively. But do you think all the ships on all the stations are running on that? They're running on the best quality ship coal that the Royal Navy can get in those stations, and can get to them. The Royal Navy always has pretty darn good quality coal around the world, but they're not always running on the finest ship coal that the Royal Navy can get, because it's getting it and then moving it to where you need it. There's a whole logistics in it. Now, I don't want to get into this too much because, and one of the reasons why I keep getting my phrases confused is because I've been helping a friend recently who is doing a lot of work on this and is actually publishing a book, and I want to keep their powder dry. But I've read now so many drafts of it that, frankly, I'm starting to get the words confused, because typical dyslexic, if you read it too much, it becomes jumbled up in your brain. You need to let it go for a few weeks and it'll calm down there, and then read it again. It'll be stuck in there forever. But when that book does come out, I will get them on to historians. Probably it'll be next year's version. And I will highly recommend their book. Hopefully, if everything goes through. They're having even more trouble getting the pictures than I am, but that's because the pictures they want to include are mostly in tiny archives which are run by volunteers, and actually, as my friend would put it, they always want to help you, but they get like 2 hours of volunteer time a week to help you, and if you can't go to that archive on that day of a month or week when they're there at that time to photograph it, you don't have any other opportunity to get there. And it's matching that schedule with your own schedule. So it's not a case of cost for them, it's a case of scheduling with work and other things they're doing. But thanks for the comment. And thanks for the article you sent me the other day as well. Scuttlebutt 7. Alex. And this is one from Steve. How does the chemical toxicity of Mazut compare to the synthetic fuel oil that cruise marine used in World War II? Considering the environmental concerns about World War II wrecks, which are now decaying in the Baltic and North Sea of the coast of many European countries. Let me put it this way. If you gave me a choice that I was going to get shot in the head, or I could swim in one or either Mazut or the synthetic fuel oil, I'd probably think I could hold my breath long enough to get through the synthetic fuel oil. I wouldn't go anywhere near the Mazut. Mainly because I doubt I could actually swim through it, because it's that thick. But leaving that to one side, chemical toxicity, neither is very good for you. Honestly, I think I would just about live long enough to be able to tell people who kidnapped me and put me in that situation. In either case. It's really not good for you. So I do not recommend going swimming in either of those fuels. In terms of environmental impact, it's you don't. Let me put it this way: they're both bad enough. There isn't much choice between them. It's like half a dozen one, six of the other. It's pick which you consider worse. One will take longer to break down, and will cause absolute issues with wildlife because of that. The other one will break down a lot quicker, but it will get into the food chain and poison lots of things that way. So one will kill them by basically coating everything in itself, and the other one will kill them from the inside out. No, just that's... Yeah, no, it's just not good. Paul from Chicago. Building organic catabolic naval aviation sounds expensive and exhausting. If I'm a medium or large power, I'll go with long-range maritime patrol, strike sensor aircraft, a handful of frigates for escorting my friends as carrier battle groups, satellites and submarines with big torpedoes, and 3 hospital ships, and buy 2 used helicopter DDs for cheap. Once we've got the helicopter destroyer figured out, I might start looking for catabolic technology training, but probably not. Cruise missiles are big, but torpedoes are cheaper, and hospital ships are better naval diplomacy. Now, hospital ships. Paul. They always sound great for naval diplomacy. They really do. But, and there are issues with them on that front. In that, whilst you would think countries would always be universally happy when they are in the situations where they need such help with such things turning up. However, look at the way some nations react to Mercy or Hope turning up. The American hospital ships are some of the finest hospitals floating around this world. They really are. And yet some nations, when they turn up, act absolutely horrendously towards them. I'm not talking about the people who are being treated. I'm talking about the wider nation. Because in some ways it seems being a bit of grandstanding. They are useful. They are important for disaster relief. But turning up outside of disaster relief, you will tend to divide a nation more than you will help it. In some regards. This doesn't mean they're bad things. But it means that hospital ships are not the universal panacea for naval diplomacy you might think it is. Also, that's one side of naval diplomacy. Now, how do you do deterrence? Hospital ship can't do that. How do you do fishery protection? Just plain old presence. So a hospital ship can do presence to an extent, but remember, for them to be a hospital ship, they can't be armed. They cannot be armed in any way, shape, or form if they're a hospital ship. So yeah, I'm surprised you want 2 used helicopter destroyers, etc. I'd have said if I was a medium or large power, and you're building this thing, I'm surprised you didn't go the LHD route. Because you can stick a great big hospital facility, medical facility border, and for disaster relief, an LHD with a hospital facility is probably one of the absolute best things there, because you can send out loaded up with engineering equipment and supplies, offload the supplies, use the space in extra as refugee accommodation, or as a refugee accommodation, use the command and control facilities to allow the local government to command and control their systems, what's going on, and actually be able to run things. You can use the hospital to support the hospital. You've got a helicopter flight deck and helicopters running around. You've got landing craft utility to act as small boats moving stuff around. You know, an LHD is frankly sodding amazing. It really is. I would have said those. I would have gone for over helicopter destroyers and hospital ships. I'd have gone for an LHD. I really would have. Now, if I'm being clever, I make sure there's a ramp on there, and I have the option for F-35Bs or something in the future. Because they're useful. They're useful. But I don't have to get those. I know the Australians with the Canberras decided to buy a ship which was going to come fitted with a ramp, but make sure all the other facilities were removed for F-35Bs. But if you're being sensible when you're building it, A, possibly get something slightly bigger than the Canberras are, and B, you leave those things in, or at least you leave it so it can be fitted for those. It's fitted for those things, but maybe not with. You don't have it taken off. And taken out design. It just makes life easier. Long term, it gives you options. And options are useful things. They really are. Now, this comment started off a very interesting discussion and a very interesting pattern. Suddenly, lots of people are going, no, STOBAR's a great idea. I was going, why is everyone talking about STOBAR? And this was Who Struck John? I hope no one has struck you, John. I hope you're okay. If you have been struck, please seek suitable remedy. Maybe contact the police if it was really painful. You shouldn't be in fear of being struck, and you should know who struck you. And if you don't, that's really a problem. If someone just randomly is striking you, that's not good. Sorry, I'll stop the small joking now. But this is the trouble of being a uni lecturer. The whole thing of doing that sort of stuff, it's just ingrained into you at the moment you do it. Japanese don't have Vistol carriers. They have aircraft carrying destroyers. That's a distinction without a difference, broadly speaking. Especially with the conversion of the things they're doing with their ships at the moment and what they're adding into them. They used to have aircraft carrying destroyers. They used to be helicopter DDH helicopter destroyers. Now they have fitted for F-35Bs, and yeah, they're aircraft carriers. They're Vistol carriers. I think they're going to want STOBAR carriers soon. Not sure what a strange name they'll describe them to the yet. Probably aircraft carriers. I think they'll probably get through with China getting them. It's amazing what China getting aircraft carriers and operating quite a large carrier fleet and growing carrier fleet is doing to the mines in the Far East. It's very much focusing them. Although, of course, with both Korea and Japan as well, there's to extent them having them because the others have got them. Now, my response to that is I don't think STOBAR is. STOBAR is the worst of both worlds. And I'm going to read off my comment and then I'm going to elaborate on it. It puts the weight limits on aircraft to allow them to do short takeoff. Remember, you have to have light aircraft for that. But also requires the aircraft be built to the structure level to survive the controlled crashes that are barrier-assisted recoveries. Okay, do you start to see the problem? It basically works if all you're interested in is air defense and very limited strike. But when you add in the fact that no aircraft are being designed for such a system outside of Russia, it's very unlikely. The Japanese would have to do an entire build themselves. Because the American aircraft are being built Calabar. There's the F-35B, but that's Stovall. And rolling landings. If you said, well, let's fit a tailhook onto an F-35B, they go, well, we're going to charge you money. That'll become the F-35D.
as it's going to be a new variant, and we're going to need to redesign this airframe to stick in a hook of sufficient proportions and structural airframes sufficiently strong enough to take the scenario of such a landing. They're going to go, but haven't you designed it for the F-35C? Oh, yes, we have, but the F-35C is designed for a catapult-assisted takeoff, so it can be heavier from the get-go. It's fun. But when you... the likely option, or true middle way, is short takeoff, rolling landing, which is what the Royal Navy are doing with the F-35Bs, which is what Queen Elizabeth are built around. Now, the interesting thing I've been thinking about with this coming on is next generation of airborne early warning aircraft. And I'm not surprised to see this as an area which people are not talking as much about in terms of drones as I think they would be. People keep talking about drones in terms of strike and tanking, but not airborne early warning. And I think that's possibly to worry about data capacity, but I think it's also possibly because of the amount of effort being put into it. Usually, as a rule, you have two scenarios if no one's really discussing it as an option in terms of defense procurement. It either really is an option and no one's putting any money into it, or lots of people putting lots of money into it, but no one wants to talk about it because no one wants to let out how much money they're putting into it and how much they're banking on it for the future. Seeing as there's already been rotary UAVs with specialist radar fitted them to allow them to peer through jungle canopies that have operated kind of like airborne early warning for companies in exercises, i.e. infantry companies. The next level up, i.e. something with maybe fixed wing in flight endurance and capabilities and a suitable radar unit and with power supply, etc., is probably not that far off. But I'm guessing the scenario coming down to is working out what that platform's going to be. Because that platform is going to have some hefty power generation facilities. Because that's the real hog in all of this discussion when we're talking about airborne early warning. It's the power consumption of that radar. I think once that's worked out, that's going to change a few opinions. Now, I realise that some of the discussions about the Queen Elizabeth class keep suggesting, well, potentially we're going to fit an email at some point. I don't see them getting emails or needing emails to have a strike UAV. I don't. You can make one that can work sufficiently on the systems already there. However, type of UAV you need for airborne early warning, with the kind of orientation you want it to have, that suddenly becomes potentially necessary. But also potentially limiting, because you've also then got to figure out how you're going to be landing the thing. Again, barrier-assisted recovery can be put in. But if you're going for a full Scuttlebutt conversion, why not go to full hog? Please note what I mean when I'm saying this. So at a certain point, the F-35B, A, B, and C will probably give way to the F-35D, E, and F. Most likely. With the F being the next second generation Scuttlebutt variant. Now at that point, if we're already looking at converting and installing emails and things to the Queen Elizabeth class, why not go to full hog? Install them properly, get rid of the ramp, do all the work necessary, because you're going to have to do 75% of that work anyway, so you might as well do the full 100% in a full mid-light refit, and then change over to the Scuttlebutt equivalent of the F-35B. Although, at which point, you're going to have an option of a Hawkeye, or maybe Hawkeye replacement, which could be a crewed system for airborne early warning, which can allow you to do forward airborne control rather than just airborne early warning. And that opens up a whole other can of worms. Now, usually at this point, people bring up, well, the Royal Navy Queen Elizabeth class carriers should have been Catabar from the get-go. And you can make that case for a better carrier. They're, Catabar carriers are probably the, engineeringly wise, in an engineering version, the best you can get. But remember, we're not talking about the necessarily purely engineering scenario. We're also talking about psychological in terms of political scenario for getting carriers. The Royal Navy knew to get them, they couldn't be a risk to the Royal Air Force's future programs, because the Royal Air Force has proved very good at winning political fights, time and again and again. F-35C is what would have been, especially when it's being procured, a threat to the program which has now become Tempest, a threat to the Eurofighter, and Hawkeye would have been a threat to the what has now is the E-7 Wedgetail. Because why do you run 2 fixed-wing fleets of airborne early warning aircraft? And if you're getting F-35Cs with their strike range and their operational capabilities, and considering they're not Vistal aircraft, they are exactly the same operating from land bases as Eurofighters, are you absolutely sure that no accountant in the Treasury is going to say, why do you need both fleets, sir? Why are you getting further Eurofighters? Just order more F-35s and standardize on one fleet. I.e., going the Catabar route might have got you a better carrier if you got it, but you might not have got a carrier at all. It's always better to have a carrier than no carrier. Even if you're going to do an exercise which tests them to destruction, and then go, wow, we found out that we can destroy these ships if we chuck enough at them. That was the point of the exercise, was to see how much you could chuck at them before they got destroyed. And their task groups. But, again, if you consider all this and look at task group strength and all these things, and people go, well, Britain can't afford this, well, they could. One of the problems, again, if you're looking at them, is Britain paid for pretty much the cost of 3 carriers, and a bit more, and took delivery of 2 because of the way they delayed the construction. With the Type 45s, once you include the reason they can't be called billion-pound destroyers, and even that's not quite accurate, as it seemed to me the other day, they're actually slightly more than that per unit when you're working out, is because they not only had to pay some cancellation fees, they also had to pay for research fees, and all those are included per unit cost. But that's the point, is that if they built the next 6, their average price would probably have been, rather than the first 6, which average price was roughly 400 million a unit, next 6 would probably be roughly 300 million a unit. There are figures, I've got them elsewhere, somewhere, but I know I said it correctly some point, but that's from memory. If I got it wrong, please go look up the video where I said it. I actually had the figures written on the screen, was giving them. You could have therefore had 12 destroyers for roughly 7.8 billion. So that would have been less than 800 million, but probably still been 750 million pound destroyers. So 2 billion more. But that's then going to cost you more in terms of crew numbers. But if you think about it, if you ran it as a fleet with, let's say, 3 in sort of mothballs or major refit ending point, and the other 9 being ones you're using, and then you churn them out, then all those extra costs we've probably had in waiting for their engineering support to be integrated would be gone. You would have had more vessels available for surging when you needed them, because if you could find the crew, of course. But also you would have to less disrupt maintenance schedules, and when you disrupt maintenance schedules, that tends to increase the cost dramatically on a ship, because it causes more things to go wrong. The trouble is often with
most procurement, and I'm using Britain as an example here, but I could also talk about the French procurement system and the American and the Canadian and the Russian and the Chinese, and all these is because of politics. The answer comes down to you get the forces your politics has paid for, whether that's politics internally of, okay, well, if we do this, it's going to set us in a fight with this other service, and that's not good. Whereas if we go this way, we go the F-35B, we go with a STOBAR design, that actually puts us in partnership with that service. So instead of us working against each other in funding fights, we're going to be working with each other, which makes us more likely to get this, which is good. These become factors, again, in your procurement, in all the things you're working towards. And I know I say it a lot, but it's something which needs to be remembered. Right, next one. Oh, you poor person. I forgot about you. Anything that can be said about a carrier is worse for... to be a panic ass on the internet. Well, A, language, but we'll leave that to one side. At 1725, you say anything that can be said about a carrier is worse for an airbase. Good sir, you can sink a carrier. Sinking an airbase is not so much. The carrier does have a lower damage threshold for being practically irreparable. The airbase needs to be irradiated to get to that point. Anything less is to fill in the holes, displace dirt and new concrete, and the airstrip itself is good to go. The other facilities may need more work. It got proved a lot in World War II. Japan bombed out of airfield, bulldozed dirt back in the holes, and it was up and going again. Oh, goody. Alrighty, so here's the thing. If I can find it, I can kill it. An airbase doesn't move. It's able to be found by Google Maps. It can be killed a lot. It can be killed a lot easier. You need a lot of defenses to defend. You need to move around and put defenses in place to defend an airbase. Do you have them? Maybe you do. Maybe you don't. In the case of Britain, we really don't. We don't have enough air defences to defend our air bases. That's one of the reasons why I find it funny when people point to carriers and go, they can be killed. And you go, well, if they can be killed with the fact that they can be moving around and avoid and trying to not be in a place where the enemy's going to kill them, and they actually have a task force around them which has missiles and all these things in them to defend them, then what happens to the airbase which has no defences? Because if you haven't noticed, Britain has no equivalent to Patriot in service for the land force, for the army or the air force. It has not enough air surface to air missiles or not enough land scepter batteries for anything, any kind of defense of things. This is one of many areas which under the investment in defense. But yeah, you can sink a carrier. Yes. But to sink a carrier requires quite a lot of work, as has been shown in history. It's quite a lot of work to do it. They're usually big ships with a lot of subdivision, and they've had to have a lot of cumulative damage in previous battles, which is built up with repair on repair on repair, which makes them weaker when they take the final damage, or you're hitting them like HMS Eagle with about 4 torpedoes, which is kind of a bad day in anyone's book. But airbase doesn't need to be irradiated to get to that point. I can put troops on an airbase. Very difficult for me to capture an aircraft carrier. I can get it within artillery range. Aircraft carrier can move out of that. I can cut off your supplies. You can't be logistically supplied. There are lots of ways of killing an airbase, of doing the equivalent of sinking it. So yeah, I think General Bismarck, by the way, just a small thing, Otto von Bismarck, if you want to be correct, because you're calling him General Bismarck, was Colonel General with the rank of Field Marshal in the Prussian army, and he'd only served 1838 to 1839. Just saying. Well, you did want to be pedantic, but also language, please. I tried to run a channel which my little cousins can look over, and they don't learn words which are going to get me into trouble. And yeah, you don't need them to make your point. You really don't. And I hope I hope the inner cynic in me didn't take over at that point, and I didn't turn too pedantic getting back. Because at the moment someone writes, I hate to be pedantic, it just makes me want to be pedantic. Again, I'm not sure if this is a British thing, but definitely it's the sarcasm coming in. So, next one. Oh, this is Soviet Navy Aviation Doctrine. El Caro, Soviet aircraft carriers. One thing that would result is it being fitted out of the Graf Zeppelin wouldn't be delayed, and Zeppelin would enter service in 1940. And the Flussgard B would be most likely finished into service in 1942. If Graf Zeppelin survives Wurzburg, it would be a disaster for the Soviets, as it would hamper the Nordic convoys massively as well. And having Graf Zeppelin there to scout would prevent some disaster for the Kriegsmarine. The Soviets can't operate carriers against the Kriegsmarine, as Germany had land-based strike aircraft in Norway, while Germany would have another tool against the convoys. The Black Sea and Baltic is too small to operate one against Luftwaffe and would be pushed into in the eastern parts till some bombers found them. Only in Pacific the aircraft carrier would survive, where they didn't have a war going but still using up resources. So all in all, it would be worse for the Soviets having one. The only possible thing would be viable as the Soviets sell the aircraft carriers to the US for 1 to 2 years while Saratoga and Enterprise are alone, and buy them back when the Essex arrives. Together, Russian officers which are engineering reserves would give the Soviets at least a level of expertise they may need later, and some carriers may be built in the early 50s. Now, my initial response was this: interesting, but not sure I followed a land-based aircraft argument preventing operation, as after all, this is what the British did in the Mediterranean, and whilst they got damaged, compared to the operations they successfully carried out, it was both viable and worth it. Furthermore, northern Norway Arctic is not as air power friendly as the Mediterranean is by a long shot, far fewer bases and far more difficult to supply. Now, I wanted to respond in Scuttlebutt 7 because, frankly, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there to unpack. I wasn't surprised in some ways to receive a comment like this, but I'm going to unpack it. Now, the thing is, if the Graf Zeppelin is being built, that's going to have interesting consequences on British carriers, British carrier procurement, and the pace of that, and might even provide an argument further for not pausing the carrier construction, although I doubt it's going to help them with the argument on the capital ship construction for the Royal Navy. I think it might mean that some of the carriers don't get paused. Probably the Illustrious class. I'd say the Implacables will still get paused, but the Illustrious class would get completed as scheduled. Or maybe even slightly earlier. Because whilst you can't really move most of the battleship people across to corvettes that easily because they're in completely different yards and you have to move them down there to do that, and move them around and reorganize them, you can move them quite easily across to the carriers because they're often on just another slip in the same yard. Soviets can't operate carriers against the Kriegsmarine. Germany had answered that one. That's not going to. Germany would have another tool against the convoys, yes, but they also have another thing which is going to be as heavily targeted as Tirpitz, Bismarck, and all the other German capital ships were. So that could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. I wasn't suggesting having one in the Baltic. Black Sea, they probably would have one, but the Black Sea is again a different space than the Baltic. It's far more Soviet friendly, and there are eastern parts of it, and it's going to add a whole other dimension to the convoys and operations going on in the Black Sea. So that one's a very interesting scenario. The Baltic, I don't even agree with operating an aircraft carrier there today. I really don't think it's not the right space to operate aircraft carriers. The Mediterranean is small and tight. The Black Sea is just about viable for the Soviet Union, mainly because they control they start off with so much of its border and so much of its ports, and they have so much space and infrastructure to support that carrier from, and land-based aircraft to operate with, and a system and land bases to work from, that it can work. Baltic, no. Baltic, just no. But I didn't suggest they'd have a carrier there. And in the Pacific, you said the aircraft carriers survive. Actually, I'd have thought the Pacific aircraft would be number one killed. Because there was a Russian-Japanese war going in 1939, and the Imperial Japanese Navy would have killed that thing. They're going to go gunning for anything in the Pacific. Literally, it's going to be Russo-Japanese War, Electric Boogaloo 2. Yes, the army's going to lose on land still to the Soviets, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Navy has done their level best to take out every single ship the Soviets have out there. They did historically try it, but they didn't. There wasn't really much for them to go hunting for. If there's more there for them to go hunting for, they're going to. And that's going to have interesting lessons for everyone else. Now, your idea about the Soviets selling their aircraft carriers to the US for 1 to 2 years. Ooh. That got me thinking about the design methodologies of the Soviet carriers and how useful they'd be. Honestly, the US would probably have to do a massive refit. So even if you get them handed over, whilst the British carriers had a refit for the heavier aircraft, I'm guessing, looking at some of the Soviet ideas on aircraft management, the Americans would want to rip the carrier apart and completely rebuild it. That adds all sorts of things. That is a question you should take to Fleet of Oceans, the friend who joins me on Sundays, and ask him to factor into a sort of Red Fleet timeline, that one, because that could have some impacts. That could really be interesting. Right, next one. Ewok 40. Okay. Ewoks are now in Warhammer. That's both strangely appealing and strangely worrying at the same time, but leave it to one side. Some comments, this is also on the Soviet Naval Doctrine. Soviet comments, Russian Navy Doctrine conundrum is dating back to Crimean War. How do we stop maritime superpower UK back then from landing everywhere from Petropolis on Kamchatka to Angelsk in suburbs of Petersburg to, well, of course, Crimea? It kind of repeated itself in Western intervention troops in the Russian Civil War. Regarding fleet's capital ship continuing being carrier, battleships were in the same place until Kuantan happened. Now, okay, so here is the thing. Do you think you're going to need air support? This is the difference between battleships and aircraft carriers. Battleships were defined by their guns and their armour and the ability to hit each other and hit other ships. To change either, you had to do a lot of work. A carrier is about providing air support. As long as you need air support, you're going to need a carrier of some kind. Doesn't matter if it's uncrewed aircraft or crewed aircraft, you're still going to need a carrier. And the larger the aircraft, and the more aircraft you need to carry, because the more jobs you want to do, because again, an aircraft can only be in one place at a time, like a ship can only be in one place at a time. And if that's a place in time it needs to be as maintenance or being rearmed, it's going to be being maintained or being rearmed. It won't be up in the air, and it certainly won't be delivering ordnance anywhere. You're going to need an aircraft carrier. You're going to need a ship to sustain it, especially if it's organic to you. And the thing is, when people tend to go, well, we've got air-to-air refueling. We've had air-to-air refueling for a long time. We haven't got air-to-air rearming yet. And I'm interested in the point at which we get there, but then people go, well, what about when we get chemical lasers and energy lasers? That's going to be useful. But will we probably still need to drop bombs? Yes. Or fire missiles? Probably. Well, then, unfortunately, those things are going to be restocked from somewhere. And unless you can somehow get them entirely produced in the air from, let's say, Star Trek style replicator units, they're going to have to land somewhere to be rearmed. And if they have to land somewhere to be rearmed, that's going to be a carrier. Now, that carrier might be a ship on the water. It might be a ship up in space. It might be some kind of floating platform. I have no idea, although I don't really think a floating platform in the air is a good idea to go, because it's not got the whole space thing to go and hide in, and it's not got the fact... It's got the issue that floating in air is a lot more difficult than floating on the sea. Let's just put it that way, when you're talking about the size you're trying to deal with. And maintaining it if you're getting damaged is far more difficult than on the sea. So that's the thing. Carriers are different from battleships. They really are. They're capital ships like battleships are. But battleships are defined by their guns, their firepower, and their armour. Carriers are defined by their hangar space and what you stick in it. So if what you stick in it is not working for you, you take it out and you put something else in that hangar space. But as long as you need air support, as long as you need air power, you're going to need hangars and you're going to need carriers, which are basically... I don't like the description of airfields at sea, but they are hangar space and aircraft maintenance space you can take with you. So that's the difference. I'd also argue battleships were around for a long, long time. Ships of the line, then the ironclad era, and then the battleship era. We're talking centuries. Now, here's interesting. On the video, canals never built. What happens? John Arger said, I postulate the Suez Canal would have been a necessity because of the changeover from coal to oil to power steamships in 1920, as a considerable amount of oil was available for the UK and the Arab Banates. Therefore, the Suez Canal would have to be planned and built in or before 1910's. Kind regards. John. Kind regards, yes. But I said mountain range in the way is the only way you're going to stop it being built earlier. So the thing is, if there's physically a mountain range there, it's not going to happen. Now the thing is, there are other spots you could maybe do a canal if you wanted that sort of scenario to be put through. If you've got a massive mountain range in the Suez area, that's mountains basically the size of... We're talking they'd have to be bigger, more dangerous than the ones in Panama. So we're talking basically Himalaya-scale mountain range here. Then you go round them. Either the canal would have to go across Africa somehow, which would be interesting to cut off going around Africa, or it would have to go from the Gulf to the Mediterranean directly rather than via the Red Sea. But the Suez Canal wouldn't be built. And the question, the thing was, if I get into the debates of where that other canal be built, that's a whole nother video. And also it's a thing of, where would the mountain range end? Because that's going to affect the design. Because the mountain range runs the whole way up the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. From basically North Africa, from, pretty much the Nile, all the way up to... Antioch area. Yeah, that's gonna be fun to try and work out where you put it. That's gonna throw a big spanner in your works. Because, as I said, that's the only way it doesn't make... Because even before oil, there is so much trade going on that route around the world. You're going to make so much money and save so much time by introducing the canal. There is so much incentive to do it that if there's any way possible for it to be done, it would have been done. So, whilst I agree with you, I don't think you were actually listening to what I was saying in the video. In the nicest possible way. Just because that's what I was saying. The only way this doesn't happen is if there's stonking great big mountains in the way, because it's such a sensible thing to do. Right, next one. Well, I have notes here. If Jack Wardley, hello again. If the Lion class are unrestricted battleships, why not 12 16.5-inch guns or even 18-inch guns with super heavy shells? These two designs seem like an obvious choice. Now, here's the point going through. They're not without restrictions. They want to build them as quickly as possible. That's your restriction 1. No, so commonality of the King George V's, where possible, will boost that because you're basically iterating on an existing design rather than starting a new design altogether. There was no active 18-inch program at this point, or even a 16.5-inch program. There was a 16-inch program. So again, that's the quickest to implement. And finally, whilst they were preparing an infrastructure upgrade package, they, like the KGVs and Nelrods, were designed to be able to use as many of the large dry docks around the Empire as they existed then as possible. So basically, it's politics and consequences of early decisions making restriction. E.g., if the 18-inch program you kept going as a short defense artillery program or something like that, they would have been possibly available. If they carried on with the infrastructure investment that had originally been planned in 1922, 1928, 1934, was been scheduled for 19. Then you're going to have far better infrastructure around the Empire, so that's going to change the ships you're designing again. They are a ship that's being built without the restrictions of treaty. Yeah, they're gone, but you still have restrictions. You have restrictions which have been created by political decisions earlier on, and you have restrictions of the need for getting these ships into service as quickly as possible, which means you're going to go with an iterative design, which is why, in many regards, they could up armor the King George V quite so easily because they'd already worked out the armor calculations for putting on Alliance. So that tells us what armor was going on Alliance quite well, and as they originally planned. And the thing that's built in, basically you would have ended up with a 9 16-inch gun Lion class. That's what they're going for, and they'd have been perfectly fine. 28 knot ships, 28 30 knot ships, perfectly viable fast battleships. Having them, that would have changed World War II. If you have Lion class buildings sort of King George V's, then you have very different histories. Because triple turrets are not going to have the problems of the quadruple turrets in terms of working them up, because you've got an existing triple design you're iterating on, so you're going to be better prepared for it. And B, it's probably also going to have an impact in terms of if you're doing those turrets already and you're designing and you've got a new 16-inch gun coming in place. Well, you've got 2 16-inch ships that you're not that keen on the guns of. It's not going to cause you any trouble in 1937 if you're doing the gun program already to change those guns out. At which points you iron out even more of the issues quite quickly on Nelson and Rodney. And so by the time it's implemented on the battleships, they are even better. And they're more quickly implemented. You've got Nelson and Rodney have got better guns, and the King George V's then at that point would just come into service without much trouble. It's kind of like a similar argument to 15-inch guns, although in a 15-inch gun 15-inch gun system, if you'd gone with 9 15-inch guns for the King George V's, you would have had even more ships to test it out on. And the question becomes, well, do we want to put a 15-inch 50 on the Nell rods to make their life easier? Or do we leave them with the 16-inch guns? It all works, but yeah, you haven't got an existing program to be able to work on, and that's how the Japanese, I think, kept their 18-inch program going. It is coastal defense. Andrew Dana, it strikes me after this and Brown's Jutland book that the single thing Beatty really needed was a good chief of staff, and Eisenhower, so to speak, to take care of the details he sometimes skipped, like being briefing attached units and keeping operations in line. This is from Beatty of the Mediterranean, which might have involved working around Seymour. Some actual doctrine would have done Ground Fleet a lot of good also. Beatty sent 3 to 4 wireless contact messages, the light cruisers sent 1 to 2 more than that, and the QEs, the engaged ones, sent none. Beatty was sloppy and reckless, but he was one of a handful who didn't need and would ignore having his hand held. Now, here's my comment. Brown's book on Jutland, not always that good at remembering the things. 5th Battle Squadron were singling. To Beatty, their CO, their job was not to pass on information to Jellicoe. That was supposed to be what Beatty and his staff were doing. That was doctrine and protocol. The cruisers broke protocol and chain of command, and did it mainly because, having served with Beatty long enough, they realised what was probably happening. Whereas for Evan Thomas, this was the first time he'd served with him in this role, and Evan Thomas had been picked by Jellicoe because he was a rules follower. Because the worst thing he could do is find that someone had taken off the Queen Elizabeth class to fit those battleships and had gone off on his own and managed to get them all killed. So he wanted someone who was naturally conservative. in what he did as a selected target, as a selected commander. So Evan Thomas is perfect for that, because he's not going to break protocol, which means he's not going to do anything which is probably going to get the Queen of the class killed, but he's also not going to do anything startling or great with them. Furthermore, quality versus quantity of messages is a thing. Jellicoe didn't need a lot of messages. In fact, that would have given the game up that he was out there hunting too. What he needed was course and position, which is what the cruisers sent him. Beatty didn't give him that information. Beatty did actually have a chief of staff and a chief of staff as well. He had his flag captain who was doing that role and all sorts of things. He has senior staff officers. He has a lot more than just Seymour. People focus in on poor Seymour. They forget he has about another 3 senior staff officers as well, plus juniors running around. There's a lot more than just Seymour on his flag team. And there's all the ship's officers as well running around who are also assisting him. Beatty doesn't necessarily think what his senior officer needs in terms of information, because he doesn't think about his senior officer really. He just thinks he's telling him what he's doing, so surely he will understand. And he approaches it the same with others as well. But still, as said, he would have been a round peg in a round hole for the Mediterranean, especially early days. And thanks for the comment, because it was interesting to expand on. It gave me an opportunity to see some things. Brown's book is good. I don't want people going away from it thinking it's not good. But it has some things it doesn't include, because I think to an extent they're not part of the narrative in it. And also, books always have word limits. I know mine do. There's stuff I haven't included in it. Paul Thomas has many issues though that day. Many issues going on. 2 Soviet carriers in 1939, or listing this is on Soviet Naval Ocean. Would one be in the Pacific to face off against the 4 to 6 Japanese carriers with battle line? Best would be both in Northern Fleet, not trapped or Scuttle in Sevastopol or Kronstadt. 2 carriers would be useful, assuming they had decent escorts and ability to be supported by the coil of insular bases. They could provide covering forces for the Arctic convoys, and 2 assets would give you an availability. But yeah, the Soviets start building carriers, everyone else is going to want them. Germany, or more of them in Japan. Pretty much the Soviets start building carriers is going to cause everyone to have a bit of a panic, because, as said, as you point out, Japan's going to want more, Germany's going to want them, that means Britain's going to want more, America's going to probably want more as well. It's just going to start a carrier building race. It's quite a fun thing to think about. But yeah, 2 Soviet carriers in 1939, I'd say 1 in Northern Fleet, 1 in Pacific. And which means one's probably gone facing off against the Japanese. But that's going to provide information. A lot of information. Right then. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed. This is... Scuttlebutt has now got very, very long. I think this is probably going to be roughly an hour and a half long video. Hopefully I wasn't too sarcastic or rude. I tried to go for the level of which it's still slightly humorous, but also educational, and not me just being nasty to people. That's always the aim. But I do remember that my sense of humour is not everyone's. So, apologies if anything did come across as being rude. It wasn't intended as. It's sarcasm, humour, and occasionally a bit of inflection. But yeah... I like these videos. I like these topics. I like the questions. I do think, though, if they're getting on for hour and a half, originally I think the first ones were aiming to be, just quickly answer questions in about 45 minutes. There's one coming up which could well be getting on to 2 to 3 hours. I might have to increase the number of times a month I do record these videos. I might have to, but... Trouble is, I am conscious that I don't want to look like I am copying Friends and their very good and very great formats, because I don't feel there's any benefit in doing that. To paraphrase someone who I've seen a lot of videos of the other way, I like to do things well, I would say Alex way, but that can be misconstrued in this context. So I'm going to say Dr. C way. Which sounds more egotistical in some ways, but yeah, it's if I go with the Alex way, that could be me or Drac NFL, because that's and we're both friends, both do the same thing in show. So that's why I'm going Dr. C. Dr. C way. And yeah, it's interesting though. I do want to know how this is coming across, whether people liking the format, whether they're liking the discussions, whether you feel I'm handling the comments correctly. And I will admit that, you know, some comments I do look at it and some comments you look at and you go, where are you getting this information? Where are you coming from with this? What's this coming about? What's this coming from? And sometimes some people really seem to take it personal that I'm British. I don't know why. I've had about 3 or 4 comments recently from about officially 2 different accounts, but the syntax was similar enough. I'm surprised if one person with 2 accounts end up being blocked by YouTube because of the amount of bad words, little cousins, if you're watching, that were in them. And I do have the restrictions quite tight on those. So much so that at least one of the comments in this video I had to manually let through. I don't know if they realised there was a delay in it being posted, but I had to manually let through. Because I decided, I'll let them through. I think the little cousins probably already know those words, although I will not be wanting to see them used in a live, and I prefer not to see them in comments. Because the thing is, I'm heavily outnumbered by my cousins. And despite those little cousins, some of them growing up on farms, and some of them having parental figures in the armed forces and working on oil rigs, apparently it's always my fault if they learn new words they're not supposed to. From my YouTube channel. And I'm outnumbered by them. So, please, for my personal survival, yeah. But no, I'm still not understand why some people take the fact that I'm British to be a personal insult to them and react quite so aggressively over it. Really aggressively. There's no need. There are far better things to do with your life. Far, far better things. Right then. What else have we got coming up? That's something to think about. Thank you again to everyone who's been helping with the IKEA fund. It's all now about the Historia fund, but the IKEA fund has helped a lot. I haven't put in the last order yet, but that's because I'm working out what the last order is going to be. Last order will probably go in at the end of this month. And that'll be the last order for a while, but I have a feeling in here will end up eventually looking very IKEA-ish for a while. The latest update on pneumonia recovery is I can probably expect to be back to my full self, my usual full self, by about April next year, according to my GP. They reckon there were some issues with my treatment, is the phraseology they're using for it, that they would courses which they can understand why were taken, which but they would not have preferred done, and I've got to do all sorts of things, and I've got to get apparently got to work up my get up regular swimming again and walking a dog further and all sorts of things I've got to find a fit in time for, but I'm not supposed to do that till the other side of Christmas. I'm supposed to keep on low movement till the other side of Christmas. But what that does mean is that, yeah, by the time I am better, the list of jobs here, which I'll probably be doing, including... I might have just installed the network system by then, because frankly I'm getting fed up with waiting for it. And I'm fed up with having cables running across halls. So, yeah, I might go for, instead of putting the cables inside the walls, sticking them in the plastic boxy stuff down the sides and just drilling holes through the ceilings for them to go. Probably what I'll end up doing, and threading them around manually. We'll see. But thank you again for all your support. You're what made this possible for me to have this level of office already in here. Everything is thanks to all you and your kindness, and thank you for making the channel possible. It really wouldn't be done without you. We're coming up. Next week we have the conception, operation, conclusion of the Queen Elizabeth class, and that will be the end of the Tuesday videos of the Year of the Aircraft Carrier. But there are lots of videos coming over the Christmas period. If you've seen the schedule put forward in the Historiathon and Christmas schedule video, you will know that. There is lots of details in there about what videos are coming up at Christmas. And I'm hoping to do as many as 8 to historians over Christmas. And I'm hoping, but I haven't yet broached the topic, but I'm hoping to get someone to return for that, because there have been so many questions put in the video underneath the comments in the underneath that video, and questions that we could practically do two historians just going through and answering those questions, and maybe debating things about certain Battlecruisers. We'll see. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. Toodles.